Namaskar, folks. Jai Hind, Jai Karnataka. Wish you all a very happy and creative, ingenious, intuitive, and contributive Engineers Day, rather National Engineers Day of India, which we've been celebrating from 1968. It's been about 53 years. So, time to look back and see what's it that we are celebrating. Well, many people would say it's September 15th, the birthday of mōkṣa-gundam, viśvēśvariāh. That's right, one of the greatest engineers that not just Bharatvarsha, but the entire Vishwa or the world has produced. So we need to understand, first of all, what does this word engineer mean? Well, if you go to the roots, as I always do, because etymology is very important, it comes from the Latin ingenieur, which is also the root word for ingenuity. And that's why I wished you a ingenious Engineers Day. Well, what is ingenuity? You see, it's made of two parts, in and genius over there. The genius is always inside. It's what we've been looking at in kids. We've been looking at what we really are is in already. And what we aren't is what is the body, mind, and intellect. That's our immediate surrounding. That's not inside us. So the very concept of engineering is something external, because there's nothing to be done with the internality of who we are. Because this is Brahman, which is everywhere. So we can't do anything about it. It's already omnipotent, omniscient, eternal, and omnipresent. Where and what can we do? And once it combines with the life energy, that formless Brahman becomes Ishvara. And Ishvara is part of viśvēśvariāh, viśva-īśvara-iāh. So, Ishvara is just that very Brahman once it takes a form. Form of what? The universe, which is what Vishwa is. So Vishwa and Ishvara refer to the same actually. The universe and its Lord, and Ayya is to doubly state that it is the Lord. Viśva-īśvara-iāh. And everything other than that is imaginary. The body, mind, and intellect, the individuality that we have given is to deny our universality. And to get back there is what is his last name, mōkṣa-gundam. Moksha. Moksha is liberation. Liberation from what? From our false identity with the BMI, body, mind, intellect. Some people call this whole process as inner engineering. Well, there's nothing to be done with the inner. The inner is as it is awesome. It's only the outer that needs to be worked upon. But what we are doing is going beyond just the body, mind, and intellect and working on the so-called world outside. And that's what is creating all these so-called engineering structures, the engineering vehicles, and so on. Many people think engine or that which moves, let's say a train or a locomotive, is essentially what is the root word for engine, engineer, and engineering. But not so, it's actually ingenuity. But even if it was so, engine is something that moves. But when you are everything and present everywhere, where do you move from and where do you move to? You're already there everywhere. So there's no question of movement there. And there is no such thing as an invention. Everything is a discovery, because this entire universe is already having that infinite knowledge and wisdom. Just because I saw it first, I call it a discovery. Even that is an overkill. And I try to modify it in some way, transform it in some way. Of course, using my ingenuity, which is not mine actually, but the universal ingenuity. Because I've subjected my intellect to the universal intelligence by combining the intellect with the prana. It becomes the universal intelligence, as we've already seen. And when you operate that out in the world, that's what leads to so-called discoveries, which sometimes if the value addition is substantial, which most people cannot see is already there, but think that it's some major contribution of a great person, which every one of us, you and me, are capable of, if only we want to. How badly do we want to do that? And then when the value addition is beyond a certain threshold, we tend to term the so-called discoveries as inventions. Oh, give us a break. What is there to be produced? Everything that is needed is already there. It's just a question of the right perception and putting things together that already are there. And that requires ingenuity, and that requires engineers, and that requires engineering. The engineering education, with the new national education policy being implemented in Karnataka, the home state of, well, I wouldn't like to call Sir M. Viśvēśvariāh, but Shri mōkṣa-gundam viśvēśvariāh. Shri and Sir are two words, when transliterated into English, are made out of the three same letters, S-I-R, just the I and the R interchanged. Because if you look at mōkṣa-gundam viśvēśvariāh's life, it is a fairly long life, especially for that time when the life expectancy in India, which was completely drained out of all its humongous resources by the British to build their towns like London, out of the sweat and blood of Indians, literally, whitewashed plains of India, with the bones of the great talent and skills that we had, especially of the textile engineers. Well, they didn't have a university degree certificate and a stamp. So what? They were able to do what an engineer is supposed to do. Use the ingenuity to transform things that are already there in a form that is more usable, makes life more comfortable for the body, mind, and intellect of not only theirs and their families, their societies, but the entire nation and globe. But to suck all that out was what the British did. And if you look at Viśvēśvariāh's long life, he was born in 1860, just 3 years after the first revolt that happened in 1857. And probably, I think, if I remember right, 3 years before Gandhi was born. Mohandas Karamchand. Because some people need that introduction. With Gandhi, they think of many other Gandhis that have happened in this country, unfortunately. But what we are talking about is mōkṣa-gundam viśvēśvariāh, born in 1860, lived up to 1962, 102 years. And well, according to the Vimshottari Dasha of Brihat Parashara Maharishi, who is indeed the great grandson of Vashishta that we talked about as at our Sahasrara Chakra, one of the Sapta Rishis, who in turn is just the direct mental son of Brahma, our own creativity at the Vishuddhi. Now, this Vimshottari Dasha gives the total lifespan of an individual according to all the cycles gone through, all the major effects of all the planets and sub-effects of the sub-planets, etc. What we call as the Dasha and Bhukti system totals up to 120 years. So he lived 102 years, pretty much the entire Vimshottari Dasha cycle. And if you, let's for approximation say just about 100 years was his lifespan, can be divided into 4 parts, quarters of 25 each. The first 25 of Sri mōkṣa-gundam viśvēśvariāh's life was spent in education, as it should be. Because remember, in our scriptural system, scriptural not in the sense of a written form like a Bible or a Quran, but the knowledge system just absorbed from the universe in the form of sounds, the ultimate sense organ which also needs to be transcended. According to that, we have 4 stages in life of brahmacharya, grihastha, vanaprastha. We go to the forest for some time and then take up sannyasa, right? Now, this 4 is very, very clearly demarcated in the case of Viśvēśvariāh's life. Okay, what are these? The first 25 he spent on education. He's from a Telugu family. Mōkṣa-gundam is actually a village in Andhra Pradesh, but he was born in a village in Karnataka. Those times, these states didn't exist. They were Bharatvarsha. State reorganization took place much later. There was this the state of Bombay, which is ruled by the British, then the state of Hyderabad, ruled by the Nizams, and the Mysore state, ruled by the kings, except for a brief period when we were taken over and decimated completely by Hyder Ali and Tipu Sultan. But for that small period, it was a fairly independent country. Yes, to some extent subjugated by the British, but far more independent compared to the Madras state or the what's called as the Madras presidency or the Nizam or the Bombay state. And the roots of mōkṣa-gundam viśvēśvariāh is from Andhra Pradesh in terms of his genetic inheritance, but born in the present-day Karnataka, in Chikballapur district, and in a very, very small village. But his education was all outside that village. He went to the Central College in Namma Bengaluru. Then he went on to the University College in Pune, one of the oldest engineering colleges there. Maybe in India and even Asia for that matter. And after studying civil engineering there, in Central College, he did a degree in science. How important is science and math in engineering? It's a basic building block. Engineers who don't know their science and math well are just managers who are in the garb of engineers. Engineering translates to yantra, engine being yantra, and a person who's working on the yantras or machines or mechanisms is a yantriki. Just like a technology is tantra and a technologist is tantric, right? One thing we miss out is mantra, which we have completely forgotten in a mantric. A true engineer has to be a combination of yantrik, tantric and mantric. If we go by our usual system of body, mind, intellect, we are talking about the body requiring the tantric, the mind requiring the mantric and the intellect requiring the yantric, or tantra, mantra and yantra, which we went through already, because we have forgotten that this is what we are. And therefore we think that this is what we are, and therefore looks like we have to do inner engineering. No, my friend. There's no such thing as inner engineering, because the inner doesn't require any engineering. It's only the outer which requires engineering. But what we have done is to engineer things other than our body, mind and intellect. In that sense, it's further outer and further external. Now we bring us back to our body, mind and intellect, which are not us. They are different from us. BMI is separate. It's external to us. And this is us, the soul, Atma or Brahman, along with the universal life energy, which gives the formless a form. Now, in spite of being that, if we identify with this, then yes, we have to do what is so called as inner engineering. But this is also external engineering, but it has to start from here. If you haven't made even your own body, mind and intellect comfortable and stable platform to work out of, what great contribution are you going to make to the so-called outer world? Whether it is your family, your own kids, your parents, your spouse, your society, your nation, the world, whether it's humanity or other life forms. No, first we have to work on this outer engineering or external engineering at the immediate neighborhood. Then you work on your family, then you work on your society, then you work on your nation, then you work on your globe. It's a question of stabilizing your own immediate surroundings, immediate neighborhood, so that you can contribute on a much larger scale. But all of this is not at all necessary. If you already recognize that this is what you are, then you've become all-inclusive in an embrace and everything is you. Then there's no need of an engineering as such. You still do all the things that engineers would do, but don't call it engineering, because there's no ingenuity anymore. It's just a matter of fact. I have to do it because that's my nature. And in that sense, we are ingenious or engineers by nature, not by a degree of a university, however high it might be ranked, either within the country by NIRF or outside by QS, Shanghai, and Times, Higher Education, and what have you. All those rankings are for universities, for people who have not yet recognized this is what they are. They are Brahman. Aham Brahmasmi. Because you've been shown your consciousness is Brahman, Prajnanam Brahma. And you've been taken further to say Tat Tvamasi, that thou art. And then you have recognized and say, I am Atma Brahma. This Atma is Brahman. And then eventually you declare, Aham Brahmasmi, with or without the forms, due to the life energy, the vital energy of the prana. Whether you live in this body or not, out of the body experience, either during the lifetime or after death, or through moksha, it's all the same. Let's next look at the word Gundam in his name. Gundam is the usual Telugu word which is used, which is also, of course, from a Sanskrit root, as most Indian languages are. And Kundam essentially means a container. And we contain moksha or liberation within us as a container. That's what mōkṣaguṇḍam means. Gundam also, of course, means to some extent grass, which is very fragrant. And a fragrant grass refers to the fact that it's simple. Moksha need not be as complicated as it is made out to be by many people who have commercialized religion and spirituality and marketed it and competing with each other to get people transformed to their religion, what they call as the process of conversion, because of their own insecurities and inferiority complex. When they see that their numbers are small, they want it to be more and more. In the garb of helping somebody else, they try to get into conversion, right? But moksha is a gundam, as is suggested by Sri mōkṣa-gundam viśvēśvariāh's beautiful name. He comes from a Brahmin family, so obviously it's a lot of thought given to the sound vibrations of the name. Unfortunately, many others named similarly may not realize the true potential, because it's not just a question of naming, but recognizing the potential of that name and bringing it out, which ought to be done. Now, let's look at it from a different perspective. What does it mean that liberation is within us? Because the liberated formless entity and the liberated form entity, Ishvara, Brahman and Ishvara, respectively, are what we are. And therefore, it's contained within the body, mind, and intellect, which are a three-layered balloon, not a material balloon. Body is a material balloon, but the mind and intellect are subtle and causal balloons which are encompassing that. And now we have to look through that balloon to see what we are and recognize that what we are within is also what we are without, and everywhere, omnipresent. So, going back to the 4 quarters of Viśvēśvariāh's century from 1860 to 1962, in between which, of course, he got various recognitions, but all of that was in the so-called sannyasa period of the last 25 years. We were talking about the educational period, the first 25 years, where he got a science degree from Central College of Nama Bengaluru, went on to do his civil engineering at University College, Engineering College, Pune, and then he went on to do a few more diplomas from University of Madras and University of Bombay. So you see, he's been all around. His ancestry, genetics can be traced to Andhra Pradesh. His education can be traced to the present-day Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, to some extent Bengaluru also. But it's all been outside. The first 25 years, out of Karnataka. The next 25 years, where was he? He was working for the British. That's why he got the title of Sir. So the next 25 years, from 25 to actually about 49 years, he was working for the PWD department. PWD stands for Public Works Department. How many of you are familiar with that? So executing many civil engineering projects for the British, the state of Bombay. And as part of this, he was sent out to many foreign countries, starting off with Yemen, then Japan, US, etc. So only when IISc, Indian Institute of Science, was eventually established in Nama Bengaluru, that he resigned his position at, it's just a coincidence, he resigned his position with the British. Of course, the last part of it was not with the Bombay state, but with the Nizam, because there was a horrible flood in Hyderabad and some flood alleviation system had to be devised, and he did that. Prior to that, in Pune, he invented, within quotes, but actually everything is a discovery, even though it was patented later on, some kind of a floodgate mechanism which could stop floods. And the flood alleviation system in Hyderabad was also something for which he was highly renowned, notably so, and well-deserving. He also did huge contributions in Odisha and Bihar, etc. in those days, the pre-independence days. So this was all until he was 49. And then one fine day, he resigned his British job and turned towards his home state of Mysuru. The kings were ruling, Krishnaraja Odiyar IV, if I remember right. And he came there, he became a civil engineer there. He had a great reputation already. And his performance as a civil engineer was so good that soon he was elevated to the Divan, equivalent of a prime minister to the king. And he served on that position for about 6 years or so. But essentially, this third portion, that 50 to 75, that was the period in which he made huge contributions to his home state, the building of the Krishnaraja Sagar Dam, the setting up of many educational institutions, including the Engineering College in Bangalore. Of course, it's now named after him, University viśvēśvariāh College of Engineering, actually a university by itself. And then even the university is named after him, the VTU, Viśvēśvariāh Technological University, and many other wonderful institutions, the Polytechnic that was there in Bangalore, and he had a huge role to play in all that. Of course, with the enormous support of the King of Mysore, who also, of course, gave the land for the Indian Institute of Science. Viśvēśvariāh himself got a fellowship of the Academy of Sciences. But all of that was in the sannyasa period of the last 25 years, where he went on to get the Bharat Ratna. In fact, the Bharat Ratna was instituted in 1954. And the first edition, of course, went to Rajagopalachari, Radhakrishnan, and one more great person. But the second one, surprisingly, of course, went to Sir M. Viśvēśvariāh in 1955. But along with him, if I remember right, Jawaharlal Nehru got it for himself. So that kind of lowered the esteem of the award Bharat Ratna for quite some time before its dignity was restored quite recently. Well, awards apart, which is essentially during his sannyasa period of the last 27 years of his life, he did a lot of wonderful work as a motivational speaker. Some of those speeches have been recorded as written notes. We don't know how much of the history is tailored by people who wrote those notes. But nonetheless, at least the gist of it is amazing and highly motivational, inspirational, which I think today's engineering students should be exposed to. But the very concept of dam has now been damned. We have seen how horrible these dams have been for a lot of places where they have been built. People just went blind and started building dams in places which were ecologically and environmentally sensitive. And we have disgraced this planet, and what was supposed to be helping us eventually caused us a lot of harm. And that's true with all of the engineers, and that's how the Nobel Prize, as you know, has been instituted by Alfred Nobel's discovery of the dynamite, which was misused for destroying and killing people rather than benefiting people, which is what the true purpose of an engineer should be. And dams have been cause of major conflicts and loss of lives as well. Well, he still had some major long-lasting impacts, especially in the irrigation system, the irrigation network. Though he had the dam as a part of that irrigation system, the irrigation system by itself tended to improve the agricultural system quite a bit. But over the time, deforestation was happening, and many farmers were just going cash crops and avoiding trees, and therefore all these impacts of the engineered irrigation systems didn't work, because the natural irrigation system with the rains and the trees making sure that the groundwater levels were fairly high were all destroyed because of wrong engineering practices. Well, at that time, the intentions were good, but as we have seen, it's with the best of intentions that the greatest of harm has been done to mankind and to the planet as a whole, especially to the other living beings, many of which have become extinct almost entirely because of engineering. But still, engineers have a little bit of dignity in the sense that when we use the word engineer as just a verb, I'm engineering something, it's used in a very positive context, as if it's to increase its value and make it much more useful to the people around. But the word doctoring, for example, of which doctor is a related word, doctoring something means that you're messing up with something and you're causing some grievous stuff. So it's very ironic that doctors are supposed to be people who heal others, and doctoring is a verb which in English means that you are just spoiling a very beautiful system by creating lots of issues and problems in it. Well, the way the commercialized allopathic medicine is being followed today, maybe it's not a coincidence that doctoring is such a word. But even though engineering is still from the root word of ingenuity, a great word, unfortunately the way many engineering industry and engineering systems and individual engineers too have proceeded is blind to the impact or side effects, as we call it in the case of drugs that doctors give. Side effects of engineering structures have been horrible too. Some of the things that engineers have created have gone on to destroy this planet much faster than create comforts and luxuries for us. So we always need to understand that yantra, mantra and tantra are double-edged swords. This technology, this engineering, this sound vibration, which is the energy behind it, all of these have to be handled very carefully, and that depends upon not morals, ethics, rules, regulations. None of these work. They have been tried out around the world. People always find loopholes to get to them. So what is the only way? Recognize your true identity. Friends, unless and until we recognize our true identity, we'll never use our body, mind, intellect and their ingenuity and therefore engineering or medical practices for anything good for the long run. It might look like good in the garb for a short duration, but it's all disastrous. So please recognize you're not the body, you're not the mind, you're not the intellect, you're not the engineer, you're not the doctor, etc., whatever profession you might be, but you are Brahman. Aham Brahmasmi, operating with the life energy just to get a form. Once we start operating from this level, there's no engineering required, no medicine required, nothing is required. Just a proper understanding of these three tools, a proper upkeep of them, and a proper utilization of them. And then everything falls into place. So this is probably the best that we can learn out of this National Engineers Day, celebrated every year on September 15th, the birthday of mōkṣa-gundam, Sri viśvēśvariāh ji, in 1860, and he passed away in 1962, just before 5 months before he completed his 102nd birthday. He has given a lot of things materialistically, which have benefited for many decades, which have become the issue between states for river water fight and things like that. But what is far more significant is we can learn from his life is he learned to move on. The horrible association with the British Empire who are subjugating us came to an end in the middle of his life itself, when he was 49, he lived on to 102, which means another 53 years were left to work for true Bharat in the form of Mysuru state, and he had tremendous contributions there, not only in terms of the so-called engineering, but also in terms of the inspiration, the motivation, and most of all, in making us recognize that if we just keep identifying with the body, mind, intellect, and its relatives and its professions, etc., then we are not going any far. We might have short-term gains, but long-term huge losses for ourselves and for those around us, especially for other living beings other than humans. So let's wake up and let's re-engineer engineering. That should be the goal of Engineers Day. Whether it is the National Engineers Day on September 15th or the International Engineers Day, which is on March 4th, if I remember right again, instituted by the UNESCO, United Nations Education, Scientific and Cultural Organization for the whole world. All of these are reminders that whatever profession we might be following, be it engineering, medicine, or anything else, we need to operate out of our true identity. Once we do that, doesn't matter what profession we are in. We might be sweeping the floor as janitors, we might be chefs, either as homemakers or even in five-star hotels. We might be managers, we might be businessmen, we might be politicians. Because what is corruption? We always blame politicians for corruption. Every one of us is corrupt. Why? Because these three are not only not us, they don't even belong to us. I've told you already, these are on temporary loan from the universe to us for an individual identity in this particular lifetime, which is a very, very short period compared to the life of the planet and of the entire universe, right? So then we are trustees, as Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa used to often tell us through various parables. And mōkṣa-gundam Sri viśvēśvariāh ji was also a trustee. As a divan, he knew that whatever was given to him by the Maharaja was not belonging actually either to the Maharaja or to him. They were all trustees of what belonged to the entire Mother Nature, the entire life on it, of all of us. And so as trustees, whenever we misuse what is given to us as trust worthy, then we are corrupt. And the most important thing that is given to us is the body, mind, and intellect. And we are not understanding it properly, we are not utilizing it properly, we are not taking care of it effectively. So, obviously, we are going to have issues, right? So that is the place where corruption begins. Corruption begins in every individual even before he has started to get educated and begins a profession either as an engineer, politician, or whoever. So once we are corrupt at this level, that the body, mind, intellect, which have been trusted with us for 120 years as a trustee, if we are not able to understand that properly, take care of that properly, not only are we saying that it is mine, but we are also saying it is me. How stupid, how silly, how ignorant, idiotic, right? That is corruption, my friends. And that, when spread further into the next neighborhood, etc., you talk about the societal corruption, the national corruption, international corruption, of which a repercussion is the COVID pandemic that we have right now too. So, if we were to cut this corruption and eradicate it at the very root level by recognizing that we are Brahman and we are operating with a life energy, that's at the most we can get out. And these three, our bodies, our minds, and our intellects, are not even ours, but we are trustees of them for a very short period of time. They belong to the earth, and we have been given custody of it for a while. And just like our children are those whose lives are independent, whose lives we just facilitate, they are not our slaves for life, not even for the first 10-20 years that they depend so much upon, or at least their bodies depend so much upon. No, all of these are actually Mother Earth's and Mother Nature's, and the Panchabhutas go back, and so does the subtle nature also of the mind and the intellect. Though it accompanies from life to life, eventually that is dissolved as well through moksha in this Gundam, mōkṣa-gundam. Shri viśvēśvariāh ji ki jai. Namaste.